As the planet warms, wildfire season is becoming longer and more intense.
The steady rise in ocean waters will ultimately determine how long people can live so close to the shores.
The final call to save the world from climate catastrophe.
We hear about climate change all the time.
Oh my God.
We see it happening in the form of more extreme weather events and their deadly consequences. We also know there will be more of these events in the years ahead. Public concern about the impacts of climate change is higher than ever. But why, after decades of mounting evidence and warnings about how our behavior affects our environment, are we not doing more about it in our day-to-day lives? Where did the message get lost? It's not that there's a lack of information out there about what's happening to our planet. It's that a lot of us don't connect with the warnings from climate scientists. Something is literally lost in translation. It's easy to feel bombarded by the dire warnings about temperatures rising by 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030 and higher beyond that, the carbon emissions and greenhouse gases that are fueling global warming, and all of those reports and accords from the IPCC, COP, the UNEP, the UNFCCC, and most of the other letters of the alphabet.
Scientists speak science, but society does not. If we look at other examples through history, the social psychology and the communication of things like smoking or recycling, that the things that tipped the balance for individuals was communication within their family unit, with those they love. As a child in the 90s, I taught my parents how to recycle. I learned how to recycle at school, I brought it home, and I literally guilt-tripped them into making the changes.
Let's stop there for a second and look at a basic everyday activity like recycling. It's a task that most of us try to do now, thanks to society's shifting attitudes. But it's not just about reducing garbage. Recycling, plastic in particular, can have an impact on combating climate change. Scientists at the University of Hawaii recently discovered that commonly used plastic products release methane and ethylene as they degrade in sunlight. The type of plastic that ends up being the most discarded, the plastic used in things like shampoo bottles and shopping bags, that's the one that emits the most gases when it breaks down. A simple step like recycling, or better yet, reducing the amount of plastic we use in our daily lives, could serve as a catalyst to get us thinking about the environmental impacts of other aspects of our lives.
We start to give people little things that help them self-identify as someone who cares about the planet, who cares about their community, who cares about the impacts that we're witnessing. Then they'll start to develop bigger questions.
Tomas Regalado didn't used to see climate change as an urgent issue. He's the former Republican mayor of Miami. And when he first got elected in 2009, it was on the heels of the Great Recession and the real estate crash.
Our main concern at the time was to survive.
So he wasn't paying too much attention to how his city could be threatened by climate change, even though Miami is one of the cities most at risk from its effects, like sea level rise. So what led him to change his outlook? Well, it all started with a conversation with his youngest son at 4:30 in the morning over coffee. My son will wake up too, and he will start saying, listen, I read this report. I wanted you to read this report. I'm going to tell you about this. The scientists are saying this. Like he kept pounding and pounding and pounding. Eventually, an eco-friendly light bulb turned on in his head in a big way. He went up against his development-addicted council, pushing them to take climate action. And by the time he left office in 2017, he successfully rallied the people of Miami to vote in favor of a nearly $200 million plan to help address the threats the city's facing from climate change. Regalado did a lot in just a few years, and it all began with a father-son cup of coffee. I think it worked. The media bridges the gap between climate science and the public, but it doesn't always connect the dots between climate change and its impacts. That's why Dr. Genevieve Gunther started the organization endclimatesilence.org.
We've really only started to see these effects maybe in the past 5 to 7 years. And so there's been a kind of lag where the media will be reporting on these things, but they haven't actually made the connection to climate change. Just take, for example, the wildfire that ravaged California in late 2018.
The fire was the most destructive and deadliest wildfire in the state's history, and the costliest disaster in the world last year. Climate change has caused California to have an almost never-ending wildfire season. But according to Media Matters, climate change factored into less than 4% of news stories on the big three U.S. TV networks in the week the fire erupted.
We're already pretty much too late to stave off some of its worst effects. And they're not going to realize those things unless the media, which is literally mediating reality for most people, represents climate change accurately and with the frequency and the sustained coverage that it deserves.
The fires in the U.S. come amidst a month of deadly climate-fueled weather across the world.
Whether it's the media, the scientists, or you driving the climate conversation, it's something we need to talk about every day. That's because climate change is affecting you each and every day in different ways, whether you realize it or not. Droughts drive up the cost of the food you put on your plate. Floods and fires, even in another part of the country, will affect how much you pay for your home insurance. If you make choices and sacrifices each day in order to stick to a budget, to look after your health, to make sure your homes and families are safe, you can make choices and sacrifices to lessen your impact on our climate. But if we don't make these choices and sacrifices soon, the ones we have to make down the road may not be simple ones.